Hey everyone, this is James from Italian Poliziotteschi and Jolly Reviews. Going to be talking about Enzo G. Castellari's Eurocrime output and ranking them. I did a Castellari episode earlier this year, I believe, where I talked about my 4 favorite Castellari films. Since then, I've been watching some more, rewatched a couple of his films as well. Got invited onto a couple different YouTube shows as well, where I ended up talking about Big Racket a couple times, as well as Heroin. So he's been one of those directors where 2024, I have watched, a fair amount of them. And Eurocrime, I would say he's definitely one of the signature directors of Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films, but I would say overall the Eurocrime Poliziotteschi genre is definitely an underseen genre compared to some of the other Italian genres. I would say certainly spaghetti westerns and gialli are more well-known, perhaps gothic as well. So it's not as sparsely seen as something like Italian comedies from that period, but it's not a necessarily well-known Italian genre. In many ways, it is kind of the successor to the spaghetti western, which Castellari has also done a number of. I believe he's directed actually more spaghetti westerns than Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films. It's one of the focuses of this channel, and I do really hope to shine a light to some of these. So, going to be talking about the 5 different Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films that he did, as well as ranking them. I think Castellari, if we look at his career, is certainly most well known for Inglourious Bastards. Thanks to the Tarantino film, that film also occupies kind of an interesting space just because it's in the macaroni combat subgenre, not a particularly well-seen subgenre of genre of Italian films either. It's a genre I don't necessarily love quite as much. I'm not a big war film guy, but it is one that I did revisit this year and is a pretty fun and good film. Not quite up to the level of kind of the films it's aping like Dirty Dozen, but it is has a lot of the great Castellari signatures to it. And I would say of the kind of big 4 directors that I associate with Poliziotteschi and Eurocrime, Castellari is definitely one of the more well-known of them. In fact, he's probably more associated with the genre than someone like Damiano Damiani, which I think is starting to change a little bit just because Damiani is getting some light shown on him from Radiance Films that has released a number of his films recently in the past couple of years or so. But people like Umberto Lenzi and Fernando De Leo, as well as Castellari, I think are the kind of like the main directorial associations that we have with this genre. Compared to those other 3 directors, so those 2 as well as Damiani, Castellari actually directed quite a fewer films than them in the genre. I counted just 5 that I would put in there. We have Heroin, Heroin Busters, Street Law, Big Racket, and Day of the Cobra. So that period takes place from 1973 to 1980. 3 of those movies are with Nero, 2 of them with Testi. He liked to work with the same collaborators over and over again. So you have people like Renzo Palmer and Massimo Pupi. He was also considered very, very influential in the genre with this film, as well as Martino's Violent Professionals. This film, I mean, High Crime. And who did that? Steno's Execution Squad were kind of like the big films that really popularized the genre and just were very, very big box office successes that led to kind of the boom in Poliziotteschi's that occurred in the 70s. So for those reasons, I think he is really, really quite associated with the genre. But he worked in a lot of different genres. On Letterboxd, he has 37 different directorial credits. His most prolific genre is the Western. Again, kind of the predecessor to the Poliziotteschi film. He's also done 2 shark movies. He's done some post-apocalyptic films, done some kind of jolly or jolly-adjacent films, as well as some horror films too. But I really think Castellari in particular is very, very well suited towards Westerns and Eurocrime, where a lot of it is built around staging action. He clearly has a strong affinity for stunt workers and just doing different stunts and the different ways of framing action. So I think I'm not a huge fan of his necessarily horror or giallo films, but I am a fan of most of the Westerns as well as the Poliziotteschi's that he's done. The Poliziotteschi's in general have just fantastic locations and things like that that he's really, really good at utilizing. So Genoa and something like High Crime, as well as Street Law, having like sort of like Mediterranean setting is super, super memorable and really well done. If someone like Damiani is sort of like more of the literary, so like Sidney Lumet or someone like that, I would say Enzo Castellari is a little bit more like Sam Peckinpah or John Woo. He's just a fantastic stylist and, in my opinion, best of those as far as just action direction, with very, very distinct Italian flavors that come to it. I would say, the Poliziotteschi Eurocrime film, a lot of social commentary is inherently baked in. A lot of the scenarios that they would come up with for these films were just taken directly from the headlines. Castellari films definitely have some of that going on. I think Street Law in particular does, with that sort of vigilante film and framework that's used there. Nonetheless, I think his social commentary is not necessarily his chief strength. I would say people like Damiani and DeLeo are a little more sophisticated in kind of telling those sorts of stories with social commentary there. But I love Castellari because his staging and his visuals are, I think, better, some of the best around during this time period. He has a very, very distinct just style that he shows different things. Sometimes he can do car stunts in something like High Crime, where he's working with Julian Remy, but he does a lot of great work with guns and cars blowing up and things like that. And he has a very distinct style to his set pieces. In fact, it goes so far that I would describe it as sort of like a Castellari moment, where we have this slow motion, we have like a DeAngelis Brothers score come on, and it's really awesome. It's very, very memorable, and I really, really like it. And it's a style that, I think does set him a little bit apart from the other directors. Sort of like Lenzi, I would say he's on the rompier side of things. He's not as exploitative as Lenzi. I don't say that in necessarily a bad way, but his films, I think, have a little bit more of a lighter feel, and for that reason are really, really rewatchable. They're not too heavy. You don't have to think too much. And they are just, a lot of them are just super entertaining popcorn films. Sort of related to his Poliziotteschi Eurocrime output, he did a series of films in the 80s too that are very action-oriented, and I think can sort of be seen as the successor to them, but I saw that most people weren't counting these as Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films. Nonetheless, I didn't think they do play to his strengths. In fact, I think whenever Castellari is playing to his strengths of violence and action and things like that, the films, even the lesser of them, tend to be pretty entertaining and worth recommending. So we'll be doing a Castellari kind of deeper cuts episode later. So those films would be Hammerhead, Light Blast, Striker, all of which I would say are watchable and pretty fun, particularly Hammerhead and Light Blast. I would recommend both of those. Those occur kind of after the bottom was falling out of the Italian film industry, so I think they do suffer a little bit just from budget constraints and things like that. Very 80s films, all of those, but they are fun and they are good. Nonetheless, I don't think they quite compare to the height of his Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films. So let's get on to the tier ranking list that I have for Enzo Castellari. Okay, so first up, I have 3 different tiers here, and I would recommend all these films. So if you're trying to figure out what to watch, you should watch all of these films. So starting with the bottom tier, tier B-, I have Day of the Cobra. This one's kind of a chiller, light on its feet. It's set partly in San Francisco. It feels less European, which I consider to be a little bit of a knock on the film. But this one stars Franco Nero as a private detective. It's not as his performance in High Crime, for instance, is extremely intense. This film is not that, but it is fun. It's worth watching. It's been a little bit since I've seen this film, but I think it's, it has a lot of his same strengths that you'll have in those films. It's definitely not super heavy to watch, so I would recommend Day of the Cobra. If seeing Franco Nero as sort of a private eye is appealing. I think all these films have really strong leads too, just because you're talking about Fabio Testi and Franco Nero here, 2 of the absolute best leads in Eurocrime films. So I think that's something that plays, that Castellari uses very well. Tier B. So here I have High Crime. In my opinion, this is a very good film. I do think this is a film that is a little bit more influential than it is great, just because this has been imitated so much, and this sort of mold of angry cop and things like that that will do anything to solve the case has become even more of a cliche than it was at the time. Nonetheless, I think this is a very good film and worth watching. Recently restored in kind of its full glory by Blue Underground. good DeAngelis Brothers score. This one I think has better car stunts than a lot of the later Castellari films, partly because they're done by Jules and Remy. And yeah, it's just a genre setter, very clearly influenced by something like The French Connection. You have that sort of Mediterranean setting, Genoa, as well as Marseille here. You have Fernando Rey, who kind of brings a very, very clear connection to The French Connection as well. So yeah, really good set pieces. Starts out with a bang. This is one that I have rewatched this year. So yeah, definitely pretty recommended. I think this is, a pretty good entry point to Eurocrime. It also doesn't pull its punches. It is willing to kill characters that, most films today would probably not be willing to kill. Next up, I have a film that I think most people would consider a little bit lower than High Crime, but I like it about the same, and that is Heroin Busters. In my opinion, this is a little bit of an imbalanced film. It's definitely thin and lighter on the plot, but it 100% plays to the best of Castellari. It has absolutely great action. I think, in general, Franco Nero is probably the better actor than Fabio Testi, but Fabio Testi is probably the better action star. He's not to say that Nero is bad, but Fabio Testi has a physical presence and kind of bigness to him that I think you're not going to get from Franco Nero. So this one has him as well as David Hemmings. It has a great Goblin score. You look at what Goblin scored here. They did Deep Red, they did Suspiria, they did Dawn of the Dead, and they did Heroin Busters. The film basically ends on like a 25-minute or so giant chase, which uses all different things, like planes, trains, automobiles, everything. You have this fantastic shot that I cannot get out of my head of Fabio Testi just sliding down this giant escalator. It's a really wonderful film, and I think this film brings a lot of joy to me. Is it, a little thin around the plotting and things like that? Is it social commentary super well done? Not really. But as far as just seeing like Castellari at his stylistic glory with a fantastic Eurocrime score, this one's really good, and I like it quite a bit. Okay, so now we are on to Tier A, and so in my opinion, these are some of the best Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films. First up, I have Street Law. So this one has a great Nero performance. There's also a great car chase in this. This one has a lot of like your classic Castellari moments where we have the DeAngelis brothers score come on. We have Nero running. He's a great runner too, and slow motion, things like that. And it's a vigilante film. This one I think is one of the ones that was more panned at the time, but I think separated a little bit from the time that this took place. It's easy to see the appeal in something like this. I think the social commentary is about as good as it gets from Castellari here. It's not subtle or anything like that, but it is, I think, reasonably effective as far as that goes. And I think, as far as telling a very simple story, I think this one is quite good. And I think probably my top 10-ish Eurocrime or Poliziotteschi, I'd say. And definitely one I would strongly recommend. I like it, I think, more than any of the Death Wish films as well. Great Genoa setting as well. Next up, I have Big Racket, which is probably my favorite Castellari film. And it feels very, very inspired. You have a lot of different stuff wrapped up in there, clearly inspired by The Dirty Dozen. You have a really nasty racketeering mob here. And I think the set pieces are just fantastic in this film. You have 3 big set pieces. My personal favorite one takes place in the middle, where we have this shootout with trains. You have like a skeet shooter joining in. And it has some even kind of like very moody, almost jolly-like lighting where we have like reds popping and things like that. Truly fantastic DeAngelis brothers score and a great Fabio Testi. Another shot that comes to mind is when he's rolling over in the car and it's shown in kind of slow motion. And those are like moments that I think one person alone would capture, and that's Enzo Castellari. So yeah, this one's just a really, really fun romp, start to finish. Ends in a very Dirty Dozen sort of way where you have a lot of those familiar character players, Renzo Palmer, Massimo Pupi, Vincent Gardenia, coming in for kind of the ultimate revenge there. Does its social commentary work as well as, the best of Damiani? Definitely not. But if you are just trying to come up with an entertaining time to watch on your own or with other people, I think this film is really, really fantastic. And it's definitely one of, in my opinion, the absolute most rewatchable Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films. even though it gets very, very mean-spirited at times, for some reason, for me at least, this film is not as heavy as it could be. So absolutely love The Big Racket. I think it's one of the best kind of the masterpieces of both that genre as well as Castellari. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this episode, and there will be some more Castellari content coming out soon. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.